Chair of the Herts Middlesex branch of Butterfly Conservation. Thank you very much for joining us today for, I don't know, maybe our fourth talk in our series of winter events, which is about 3 more than we've ever managed before. So we seem to be on a bit of a roll. This evening, we're going to have a talk from Roger Gibbons on the subject of identifying lookalike butterflies in UK species. And we're all looking forward to that. Before we get on to that, there's just a couple of things I want to mention. We are recording this talk, and the recording will be available on the website afterwards, along with recordings of all the other talks. So if you want to...
lost the picture.
Yeah. If you want to... If you want to listen to it again, or you want to catch up with one of the other talks that you didn't manage to make, then the recordings of all of them are on the website, and I've now edited them, so you don't need a password to get in, and I've cut out the chat at the beginning, so you don't have to listen to that. So that's the record. If you don't want to be recorded, then turn your camera off, and we won't be able to see your picture. The other things I need to mention: the next event after this one is going to be on Wednesday, the 17th of March, where Andrew Wood will be talking about butterfly and moth records in our area from 2020 last year. Which promises to be a very, very popular talk. So we're all looking forward to that. And just a reminder as well, we're running a photo competition for our Members Day and AGM. That'll be the Members Day is on the 27th of March, which is a Saturday, not a Wednesday. And I think if you've got a photograph that you want to enter to the photographic competition, then the rules are fairly simple. They're on the website, but basically you have to email it to at least a couple of days beforehand. So that's all the notices I need to do. Now moving on to Roger. Roger is a member of our Herts Middlesex Butterfly Conservation Branch Committee, and also the same at the European Butterflies Group. Roger is a great expert in European butterflies and runs the Butterflies of France website, which is very popular, and a great way for getting to know your butterflies if you ever want to go to France. I think Roger spends about half his time in France, and usually the half of the year when the butterflies are out. So he's certainly got to see an awful lot of those over the years. Roger tells me he saw his first butterfly at the age of 7, which was a speckled wood in Bricket Wood, a place very close to my heart, and in those days a very, very rare butterfly sighting. So I certainly can't remember what the first butterfly I saw, but it clearly made a big impression on Roger and sparked a lifelong interest. So without more ado, I'm going to hand over to Roger. I think perhaps just mention on the previous talks, we've been taking questions that you put in the chat box at the end, and we're still very happy to do that, although Roger said he's happy to take questions as we go through as well, particularly if it's to do with an identification issue that he's got up on screen at the time. So I think with more ado, I shall hand over to Roger. If you'd like to share your screen, Roger, then we can take it away. That seems to be working.
Okay. Well, good evening. This is a talk that I've never actually given before, so I'll have to refer to my notes as we go through. I'm also conscious of the fact that there are people in the audience that probably know more about the subject than I do. But what we'll take a look at is the sort of key identification features for most of the species that occur in our region, and we'll look more closely at species that are very similar and need a sort of close look, need specific identifying features. I've tried to design this talk for people who are new, have very little experience of identifying butterflies, and also some material for people who have more experience. we'll not only look at the butterflies that are similar, we'll also look at the differences between males and females where they're different, and also the differences between different seasonal forms where there's two broods and they look different. Most of the photos are mine, but I have borrowed a few photos just to illustrate certain points from the UK Butterflies website with permission. And if you're not familiar with the UK Butterflies website, I can strongly recommend it. It's an excellent resource, lots of interesting discussion on the forums, etc. If you just Google UK Butterflies, you'll get taken into it. We'll start with the most frequently asked question: what's the difference between a small skipper and an Essex skipper? We'll come to the sort of key defining feature on the next slide. But what I've done here is I put small skipper on the left, male above, female below, and Essex skipper on the right. If you're looking at it from upper side view, the two key features are for the males, given that the females do look very similar, is that the males, this black line here is the sex brand where it emits, it's the androconial area where it emits pheromones or to attract females. And as you can see in the small skipper, this is much longer and much bolder than it is in the Essex skipper. So if you're looking at an upper side view of males, that's a pretty good way to tell the difference. Females don't have this sex brand, but the other key feature from the upper side of differentiating the two is that the margin on the small skipper is quite neat. That's called the margin of the wing. This edge is called the costa. The margin of the wing is quite neat, whereas for the Essex skipper, the edge, the black in the margin tends to edge down along the veins to give a more diffuse appearance. The key differentiation is the underside of the antennal club. Small skipper on the left, large skipper on the right. As you can see, the antennal club, we're really looking at the underside here. That's the key.
Hey, how can I help? Large tonic, please. Sorry, mate.
Who's that? Okay. Yes, on Essex skipper, the key looking at it from this angle is that the underside of the antennal club is jet black. The small skipper, it's sort of brown, a sort of fulvous brown colour, but a word of warning is that the small skipper antennal club can be quite variable, and it can be quite dark brown on the upper side and slightly brown on the underside. So the key would like me to unmute, right. So if it's jet black on the underside, it's an Essex skipper for sure. I've just shown the underside here to compare the underside of small skipper and the underside of the large skipper, which are very similar from the underside. But as you can see, large skipper has got these rather pale yellow dots, and the hind wing is much larger and rounder. Both of the species both fly in our region, and they're both quite common. They fly together. Some sort of circumstantial differences is that the Essex skipper is supposed to be very slightly smaller, but then size is quite variable. The small skipper tends to emerge a couple of weeks before the Essex skipper in mid-June. So if you're seeing something in mid-June, it's more likely to be a small skipper. And in terms of flight, the Essex skipper is supposed to be slower and more direct and flies nearer the ground, but you really have to see them both together and have a fair amount of experience before you can use that. Right. This is not taken in Britain. This is taken in southern France, just to demonstrate that they do fly together. There are about 500 in this patch, small and Essex skippers, and there were the ones I looked at, there were plenty of small skippers and Essex skippers. Just to complete the three sort of small, as they're called, golden skippers that occur in the UK, not that you're going to see this one unless you travel to South Dorset. This is the Lulla skipper. And just by way of illustration of the difference, as you can see, with the males, we're down to the sex brand here. It's thick, quite distinctive. For the Lulworth Skipper, it's rather longer, but it's much thinner and much less distinct. And the Lulworth Skipper tends to be rather darker in terms of colour, but unless you're in South Dorset, it isn't going to be a Lulworth Skipper. It also strikes me that Lulworth Skipper body is always rather longer than small or Essex Skipper, but I'm not sure if that's consistently true. And for female Essex Lulworth Skipper, they have this sort of orange horseshoe-shaped band on the forewing, which is quite distinctive. The male sometimes has this band, but it can be quite hard to identify. It could be quite weak. We move on to comma. Now, butterfly that was quite scarce, going back 70 or 80 years, and is now quite common. The reason I've included it is because there are two broods, and the broods are different. It overwinters as an adult, and on the left we've got the brood that overwinters and emerges from hibernation in the spring, and they produce what's called the first brood, which is this on the right, which actually has a special name, which is unusual for a brood. It's called Hutchinsoni, which tends to be much lighter in terms of colour. And underneath we have the undersides of these two broods. This is the underside of Hutchinsoni and the underside of the overwintering brood. And I'm surmising here, it may well be that because it overwinters in trees, that the underside pattern for the overwintering brood is more designed, or maybe more evolved, to give it camouflage for the sort of type of leaves that you're getting in trees over winter, whereas the camouflage pattern of the summer brood is probably more in tune with the sort of foliage in trees during that period. The scientific name is Polygonia C. album, and it's called C. album because it's got a white C. That's the comma mark. Given that it's got this perfect camouflage for hiding in trees over winter, it always strikes me that the evolutionary value of this little C mark is definitely a negative, because it rather gives away the camouflage. Next, second on the list of the most asked identification questions that are easily confused are brown argus and female common blue. We've got the brown argus on the left, both the male and the female in shot, and common blue on the right. With the brown argus from an upper side view, probably the main distinction, if you only see the upper side view, is that this little spot here, which is usually called the cell spot, technically it's the discoidal spot, but the cell is this region of the forewing, and it's got this dark spot here, which is more prominent, or generally more prominent, than it is for common blue. The common blue female can be completely brown, or it can have varying degrees of blue. We'll come to that later. But it quite often has some sort of blue hairs, and from an upper side view, if there's any blue at all, it's a common blue, not a brown argus. And as you can see from the male and the female here, the difference between the two sexes of the brown argus is that the orange, these things are called lunules around the edge of the wing, are much stronger in the female, more so than the male. That generally tends to be the case. One of the key elements from the underside view is, given that they do look extremely similar, almost impossible to tell apart because they're quite variable, is that for brown argus, it's these two marks here, which I've sort of ringed. These marks are in this arrangement here, whereas for common blue females, these two marks are in line with the third mark here. Quite often, these positioning of these spots can be quite variable and is quite unreliable, but this is actually quite consistent and is a guaranteed way of being able to tell the two apart from the underside. There is another way of telling them apart from the underside, and that is that the common blue has a cell spot here, as well as the discoiled spot on the underside, and the brown argus doesn't. However, the forewing has to be raised enough that you can actually see enough of the forewing to see whether or not there is a cell spot there or not. They're both common in the region and they fly together. So that's a question that gets answered. In fact, on the UK butterfly site, I would think the number of times that somebody's put up a photo and said of an underside and said, is this a common blue or a brown argus, must be approaching 3 figures now. Just to cover the male blues that we get in our region, and I'll come to Adonis blue in a second, because that might look like an interloper. This is a common blue of grassland. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Below is the holly blue, and the difference principally is that this black edging around the apex of the forewing. Not the holly blue, in my experience, often settles with its wings open. It's usually a wings closed butterfly. This is a first brood holly blue. The second brood has a much greater degree of black around the apex. I included Adonis blue because it's been seen in the county around, I believe, Thurfield Heath, and is almost certainly an unauthorised, unlicensed artificial introduction in the county. It does occur in the Chilterns, but it's not possible that it could have travelled from the Chilterns to around Thurfield Heath. So it's pretty certain that somebody's artificially introduced it. Main difference between the Adonis blue and the common blue, given that they're superficially similar, the blue of the Adonis blue tends to be a much sort of brighter, more resplendent blue. But the key difference, which is absolute, is that, as you can see here around the margin, where the veins hit the white margin, it's black around these points, all of these key points. And that's true mostly for the forewing, also true for the hind wing, but that's an absolute differentiator between common blue and Adonis blue. And I just include, just for the sake of completeness, chalk-hill blue, because chalk-hill blue often flies in company with common blue and Adonis blue, but it's unmistakable in the field because it's got this beautiful sort of silvery grey blue colouring. It's quite easy to identify even in flight. One point I'd make about where you're likely to see holly blue, it's whereas common blue, Adonis blue and chalk-hill blue are all grassland species, holly blue is not. It tends to be a butterfly of woodland edges and gardens. And also one feature that seems to me to be constant is that it flies quite high. Sometimes you can see it sort of going up maybe sort of 15, 20 feet up into trees. And if it's doing that, it's almost certainly holly blue, because I don't believe that common blue or Adonis blue do that. And indeed, you're unlikely to see them in your garden unless you live adjacent to grassland. Just comparing the females, Adonis blue on the left and chalk-hill blue, because Adonis and chalk-hill blues fly together. It's my belief that a sure way of telling these apart is that Adonis blue female will have some degree of blue on it, whereas chalk-hill blue is always this sort of cold dark brown and doesn't have any hint of blue at all. Just to differentiate, now that we've got Adonis blue in our region, that whereas this is typical with a smattering of blue scales, it can occur in quite blue forms where the blue covers nearly all of both surfaces of the wings, and that's called Semicironus. This form with the blue just covering the hind wing is sort of halfway stage, and it's called Semicironus. But in that context, it can look very similar to the blue form of a common blue. As you can see, they do look superficially very similar. But should they now fly together in our region, again, the identifier is the checkering of the margins, the black checkering. So if you're seeing something and it's a female common blue, or sorry, female blue with blue of sort of this degree, the key to it is to look at the margins and see if they're checkered. Just to address holly blue, to cover that completely, this is a male holly blue, as we've already seen. This is a female holly blue, which has this much stronger black band around the apical region, so that makes it absolutely unmistakable if you see it in the field. And again, being second double brooded like the male, the second brood female, the extent of the black marking is even greater in that apical region. This is the underside, and it's quite distinctive from any other blue underside, with the exception of small blue, but we'll come to that later on. On the forewing, the marks here are a series of quite straight black lines, almost joined together to make a complete line. But to differentiate it from any other blue underside, it's completely clear of markings around the marginal region here. And just to complete the blues, this is a small blue. You're never going to mistake it for holly blue, I don't believe, because they have quite different terrains. I don't believe they overlap at all. The small blue was quite threatened within our region, but I think it was became almost extinct in the 1990s. But there's been an awful lot of activity by the branch to manage the terrain for small blue, and also to introduce it into one or two new areas, in particular the old Butterfly World site at St Albans, and on the A41 verges near Bourne End. Not that I'd recommend that you go looking for small blue on motorway verges. The male has just a very small smattering of blue scales, and the female has even less. On the underside, should you see the two together, or you're looking at a photograph and you don't know where the photograph was taken, it's clear the markings of the holly blue are, again, these long, thin, bold black lines, and for small blue, they're rather rounder and sort of white circled. Is there anything else I need to say about that? Yes, the small blue has 2 broods a year, and the second brood is often smaller. Larger for Trilleries now. There's 3 that occur in Britain, but you're not going to see high brown Trillery, not in Hertfordshire or any adjoining county. It's actually quite scarce now. But here we have silver wash Trillery, male, and dark green Trillery. Again, you're unlikely to confuse the two, because silver wash Trillery is principally a butterfly of woodlands, and dark green, certainly in Hertfordshire, is a butterfly of chalk grassland. Another relative success story, in that dark green was threatened with extinction. It became quite depleted, but it's now recovered to quite a significant degree, and we do have colonies now. I think the strongest colonies are Thirdfield Heath, and on the west side of the county at the very rich site of Albury Knowers. The key way of telling the two apart from the wing shape, is that for the male silver wash Trillery, has these 3 sex brands, which are very wide and very enlarged, and that clearly ensures that there can be no confusion with dark green Trillery, because its sex brands are not enlarged in the same way. In fact, the male dark green Trillery might be more easily confused with the female silver wash Trillery, although a close look at the marks, especially the sort of double row of heavy marks in the hind wing, is quite distinctive. I'll mention as well that given that silver wash Trillery is another butterfly that is increasing very well within the county, and the numbers and its range, it has a form called Valazino, which you may be familiar with, with this rather beautiful sort of bronze green suffusion. And Valazino seems to make up about 10% of the female population, but I'm not sure that anybody really knows why certain of the females are Valazino, whereas 90% of them are the nominate form. And from the underside, there's no mistaking the two, should you see the undersides. Silver wash for Trillery, hence its name, has these sort of silver streaks, silver washing on the underside, and dark green for Trillery has these sort of very discreet silver spots. Very difficult to actually catch this silver in a photograph, but completely unmistakable. I'll say dark green for Trillery might be more confusable with high brown, but you'd need to be in one of the locations in order to see high brown. I've included these two because it might be fairly obvious to most of us that the difference between the wall and the speckled wood, but it's surprising how often the question does get asked, is this a wall or a speckled wood? And I have to say, if you've got plenty of experience of seeing the two, then it's relatively straightforward. But then my experience of birds and what they call LBJs, little brown jobs, leaves me completely confused. So it's fairly obvious to birders. So maybe it's understandable if people confuse these two. This is a male wall on the left, much darker brown, and a female wall, much more extensive orange. The difference between them is actually quite clear. This is actually a female, as you can tell from the body shape of the speckled wood. And just by way of identification, this is the underside of a speckled wood, which looks quite different. The wall is a species which has us scratching our heads both within the county and nationally. I think it's now almost completely disappeared from the county over the last 20 or 30 years, and nobody can quite understand the reasons why. The speckled wood, I just mentioned, it does have a claim to fame, apart from being the first butterfly I ever saw, in that in 2002, as you may be aware, Roger Walker didn't know the speckled wood was a butterfly, and it cost him £500,000, which seems rather excessive, rather punitive to me. But the reason is, as you probably guessed, he was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and he was up to £500,000, and the £1 million question was, which of these is not a moth? I think it included Mother Shipton, burnished brass, one other, I can't remember which, and speckled wood. And of course, it's obvious to all of us which one's not a moth, but he thought about it for a couple of minutes, didn't really have any idea, settled for his £500,000. So I'm prepared to bet it's still his least favourite butterfly. Another butterfly which we're lucky to have in our county, which is particularly appealing, is the ringlet. There are lots of species called ringlet on the continent. We have two in Britain, only in the north and in Scotland, and they're not actually part of the same family as the ringlet, even though they're called ringlets. This is a male upper side on the left, and it's got these ocelli or eye spots, two on the forewing, two on the hind wing, and this is a female, and is, as is usually the case, the ocelli and the markings of the female are usually much larger than those of the male. Don't often see it with its wings open. It's usually a species with its wings closed, and these are the ocelli on the underside, completely unmistakable for many other species because of these ocelli, certainly in our region, and the yellow circling. And I wonder here, and I am surmising, going completely out on the limb, and I may be completely wrong, as to what is the purpose of these ocelli. I've quite a lot of experience of the Erebia ringlet family in France, and also of the heaths, and they all have these ocelli to a quite great degree. And I wonder if this is an evolutionary defense mechanism. I am going out on a limb here, because predators, and the predators seem to be far more of a problem in southern Europe than they do in Britain, will always attack at the head end to disable the prey before quietly munching through it. And if these ocelli confuse a predator into believing that that's the head end, the butterfly would much prefer, if it's going to have a bite taken out of it, to have a bite taken out of it in the hind wing rather than at the other end. And this might seem like quite a fanciful notion, but spending a lot of time in France, for which I do feel suitably guilty, it's amazing how often you actually see these heaths and ringlets with a V shape taken out the hind wing, where something's clearly taken a bite, and been quite surprised to find the prey flying away. Right, on to whites now. They might seem relatively straightforward, but they're rather more problematical than you might think. And we only have 3 whites, all of which are common in our region. This is a large white, much larger than the small white or the green-veined white. This is the male that has just this wide apical mark in the corner, whereas the female has a mark in this sort of discal area here. But it can be differentiated from the other 2 by the fact that not only is the apex rather more pointed, but also this discal mark extends much more extensively and as a solid band around here. The female might look as if it's in a rather odd pose, and in fact it is. I don't know if you can see, just see here, it's actually been grabbed by a crab spider. And it's completely immobilized. And whenever you see a butterfly that's got its head in this unusual angle, it's almost certainly because there's a crab spider underneath. This is the underside, and as you can see, the apical mark is quite clear. It's the same size, but yellow on the underside. Might seem quite basic to say how to identify cabbage white, but not quite that straightforward. This is a small white, probably the most common species in Britain, and it has 2 broods. And in common with nearly every other species, the first brood is much more lightly marked. As you can see here, it's got this sort of rather pale apical mark in the apex and a rather weak discal spot here. And this is the second brood with a much stronger mark here in this sort of shoulder type marking. This is the female with 2 marks in the discal region of the forewing, and first brood quite pale grey and dusky. Second brood, the markings are much stronger and much more clearly delineated. That might seem relatively straightforward, but it's not quite as straightforward, which we'll come to in a moment. This is a green-veined white, the third of our whites. Again, double brooded, or at least 2 broods. This is a male, very easy to tell because the apical mark is sort of cut and tends to follow the veins in this sort of V shape, rather irregular V shape in the first brood. Not a stronger apical mark and a discal mark here in the second brood, but it's following the same sort of pattern where the black apical mark is tending to follow the veins. This is the female, the first brood, rather dusky, and again, the black mark following, extending down along the veins. And this is the second brood, female. And it might look relatively simple to identify the second brood female green-veined white. And I just mentioned before we come on to them that they do fly together, small white and green-veined white. Green-veined white tends to have a rather more slower, more floppy flight, whereas small white tends to be rather more direct. The green-veined white is not a garden pest as the large white and the small white, but they are fairly common and they do fly together, so they're quite difficult to tell apart. In terms of where you're likely to see them, the green-veined white tends to stick to hedgerows and damp meadows, whereas the small white is not quite so fussy. We'll just look for the moment between the undersides of the three whites. This is a large white, as I say, unmistakable from the underside because it's got this yellow apical mark, and the apex is actually quite strongly delineated here, much more of an angle. Green veined white, completely identifiable from the underside because of the sort of heavy scaling along the veins. I think I'm right in saying, but somebody might like to correct me, that actually the scales are not green. They're just a collection of an intermixture of black and yellow scales, which give the appearance of being green. And this is the underside of a small white, much yellower on the underside, and similarly with the apical mark is following the apical mark on the upper side. Just to a sort of final comparison on the subject of whites, this is the comparing them across now rather than down. When I say it's relatively easy to identify the green veined white second brood, actually, when you look at the small white and the green veined white, they are remarkably similar second brood. The apical mark of the green veined white is much more extensive, and again is extending along the veins, but superficially it does look very similar. And I have to say that a few years ago I put one up on my website, and I didn't give it too deep thought. I just thought it was a female small white, and sometime later somebody pointed out that actually you've muddled up small white and green veined white. I didn't actually mention this to anybody, I just changed it over on the website and kept quiet about it. On the bottom here, we've got, just by way of comparison, the male small white second brood, and on the right here, something called southern small white, which you probably won't have heard of, but doesn't occur in Britain, but it's one to look out for because it principally was a butterfly of southern Europe, but for reasons that nobody quite understands, it's moving north quite rapidly, and I think it's arrived in the Benelux countries, I think even in Holland, and it seems to be migrating north in the region of the Rhine, and it's expected here within the next few years. And in fact, we had one that came to the European Butterflies Group to say, is this the first southern small white to occur in Britain? Is actually submitted by Jim Asher, so we're not talking about beginners here. But in fact, the opinion was that it was a small white. But this is one to look out for. It may be with us in a few years' time. I'll just mention another confusion that does arise from time to time, and that is the confusion between small white, a male small white, and the female orange tip. And they do look superficially quite similar. Quite often there have been questions asked, is this a small white or is this an orange tip? So maybe it isn't quite that straightforward. The female orange tip has this sort of broken apical mark at the apex here, and a very distinctive cell spot here. And this is, by way of comparison, a male small white. Quite often when you see them in the field with a bit of light behind it, you can actually see the mottled pattern of the underside showing through. So it's actually not difficult, if you've only seen the upper side, to actually differentiate the two. I've included here some identification issues I think we'd rather like to have. On the left, small tortoiseshell and large tortoiseshell. Large tortoiseshell is a very rare visitor to the UK. There have been increased sightings in recent years. It became extinct in Britain in the 1970s, but I think there have been odd sightings in southeast England. So courtesy of global warming, it might even arrive in our region. The main difference is One is that it's rather larger. Secondly is that the ground colour of large tortoiseshell is a rather paler orange, not the sort of fiery red orange of the small tortoiseshell. And I would have thought that was enough to tell the difference, but books mostly quote this apical mark here as being white, whereas for the large tortoiseshell, it's yellow here. I include wood white, even though it doesn't occur in the county, just broadly for interest, because it occurs in Oxfordshire and probably Northamptonshire as well. So you might see it just across there, not too far away. I just include it here just by way of telling the difference between males and females. And I've ringed the antennal club, the inside of the antennal club. This is the male and it has a white spot. We are into esoteric territory here, I have to say. And this is the female. The inside of the antennal club has no white spot. It's all completely brown. And that might seem straightforward, but there's a butterfly called the eastern wood white on the continent. And everybody says, wood white has this white spot, and the eastern wood white is brown on the inside of the antennal club. I was told that by the curator at the Natural History Museum, and I said, well, actually, that white spot only occurs in the male wood white. The female doesn't have the white spot, and I think that was a revelation to him. Onto some more species which we might confuse on the borders of our region. This is a silver-spotted skipper, another rather misnamed butterfly on the left. I think it has been seen in our county, in Hertfordshire. I think the last record was 1959, but I think there's a record that it was seen in Tring in 2016. And it's another butterfly of the Chilterns, and it may creep eastwards across the border into our county. But this is silver-spotted skipper on the left and large skipper on the right. They do look superficially quite similar. These are the males above, and as with the small and Essex skipper, they have this black sex brand here, which is quite strong, quite pronounced. It's quite likely that if you're in the region where silver-spotted skipper flies, large skipper is could quite well be flying there as well. And the difference is that the silver-spotted skipper tends to be more darkly marked, and the sex brand is rather more parallel to the costa of the wing, whereas it's more angled for large skipper. And it always seems to me that the costa of the silver-spotted skipper is rather more concave than the large skipper. And the females are similar without the sex brand, but much more darkly marked. The best means to identify them is by the underside. We'll just come to that in a moment. But I mean, large skipper is common throughout our region, but you'd have to go to the edge of the Chilterns to see silver-spotted skipper. And I think large skipper comes out substantially more early in mid-May, and silver-spotted skipper is it emerges in mid-July. So it depends if you've seen it in May or June, it's almost certainly a large skipper. But the key way of telling the difference is from the underside. And as you can see, the spots on the underside from which it gets its name aren't actually silver, they're white, but they're quite pronounced, quite unmistakable. So if you see the underside, there's no confusing the two. And this again, as we saw earlier, is the large skipper with these sort of pale yellow markings that are sort of varying in strength, but they're certainly not white. And just for completeness, I've included there the small skipper. I've included some of the hair streaks just by way of completeness with these species that occur in our region. I haven't included quite all of them because some of them are really quite straightforward, like the brimstone. This is a white letter hair streak and below black hair streak, which does occur in adjoining counties of Northamptonshire and to the west. The key difference between the two is in the white marking, which gives the white letter hair streak its name. This sort of pronounced W mark here, which actually is quite similar in the black hair streak, but not quite as angular and not quite as pronounced as in the white letter hair streak. White letter hair streak is confined to pretty much confined in the region of elms. I have to be careful what I say here because I think Liz is in the audience and she's the national expert on white letter hair streaks. But it's quite a secretive butterfly. But it does tend to come down to from the treetops to nectar. It's probably more common than is generally thought because of its reticence. It's widespread, I think, in our region, whereas black hair streak only occurs in a sort of fairly narrow band between Oxfordshire and Northamptonshire. And I have to say that this year I'd normally be in France in the spring, but this year I went to Northamptonshire to Clapthorne cow pasture, which is a sort of famous site for black hair streak. And at the beginning of June, I got some information from locals, and for a very rare and localized and rather secretive butterfly, it was absolutely terrific because we saw at least 50, which I'm not sure will ever happen again. I've included this on the right here because this is one with the taken in shade because it shows the W mark in a much more exaggerated way. The sexes are very similar. The female tails are allegedly longer, but I think that's quite marginal. But one way that it's said to be able to tell the difference is that in the male, this bump in the middle of the discal area here is just very slightly raised, and that indicates male, whereas for the female, which I believe this is a female, it's not raised at all. But whether that holds true all the time, I really don't know. Just moving on, even though there shouldn't be any problem in identifying these two hair streaks, purple hair streak on the left and brown hair streak on the right. But there have been reports in the past of sightings of brown hair streak, and extensive searches have found no evidence of brown hair streak. And the best way to search, because it is a secretive butterfly, is searching for the eggs in winter laid in the sort of the branch of twigs of blackthorn, but no evidence of brown hair streak was ever found. I think we had several trips to Panshanger Aerodrome, and it was eventually concluded that the person had seen a purple hair streak, which doesn't look difficult to compare on the grounds of colour, but we think that was the case. This is a female purple hair streak. The male has much more extensive purple all across the wings, but the males tend to be quite secretive and stay in the treetops where they feed on honeydew. And this is a female brown hair streak, bucking the trend because the orange mark are much more extensive in the female than they are for the males. Okay, we're sort of getting towards the end now, so some of the more esoteric species couldn't resist including the iconic species of our region, Purple Emperor and White Admiral. Almost impossible to mistake in the field. The Purple Emperor, only the males have purple, and I'm sure most of us have seen the purple flashing on and off as it moves around. The female is completely brown and tends to stay up in the canopy. The males come down generally mid to late morning to take salts from the ground, even stony ground. This is the proboscis here. So how it actually derives anything from dry stony ground is beyond me, and the same here from the side. But they're almost unmistakable. But if it's coming down and nectaring on flowers, it's a White Admiral for sure. Just to include something that species that people have confused in the past, meadow brown and ringlet, especially the males. And from an upper side view, because from the underside view there's no problem in identifying them, the male meadow brown has this single ocellus rather, and orange surrounds and a little bit of an orange band here surrounding it, whereas the ringlet has no orange surround and has a greater number of ocelli. And by comparison, this is a female meadow brown. Again, as in most of the case, is that the markings are more extensive on the female with this much larger orange patch. And this is the underside of the meadow brown. It's pretty much unmistakable from nearly any other species with the exception of one, which I'll come to in a moment. It has this sort of very clearly delineated discal line, dark on the basal side and light on the other side. So the contrast is quite clear. And this is species which it could conceivably be confused with, although not from the upper side. And I include this because this is the male and the female. The male here left, and this area is not orange. This is the area of the androconia, the scent scales, whereas in the female, which has no need for those, it's completely orange. And this is the underside of the gatekeeper. Superficially, although it's much smaller and rather rounder, superficially similar underside, but it doesn't quite have this sort of clear contrast across the band that the meadow brown has. Okay, a little bit esoteric for the last couple of slides. This is Grizzled Skipper. It's a resident in the county, but it's rare, very limited to just a few areas, mostly in the west of the county, completely unmistakable. In France, there are 13 of this Pirgus family, and they're all irritatingly similar, and it is quite a massive task sometimes because they are all quite variable to actually differentiate between them. The reason I include this is a rare aberration called Tarus, where these white marks are very extensive and almost completely cover the forewing. This is a strange aberration. Nobody quite knows what causes it, whether it's clinal or not. But in some locations in the UK, it's relatively common, and in the others, it's almost completely absent. And when this was first seen, I think in the 18th century, the early entomologists were convinced this was a different species. I'm not sure if it was ever discovered at the time that it was an aberration, or whether they would have indeed believed that it was actually just an aberration of a grizzled skipper. This is an aberration of marbled white. I'm not 100% certain that this actually occurs in the UK, but this is a typical male marbled white. The female tends to be yellower on the underside with this very typical pattern. No identification problem in this country because we only have one marbled white, whereas there are 4 marbled white, or 5 or 6 actually in France, and several more in Europe. But this is an aberration where the underside is completely devoid of any markings, called leucomelus. It's probably about 1 in 1,000 on the continent, but I'm not actually sure that it actually occurs in Britain. And final slide, given that we've looked at ringlets and meadow browns and gatekeepers and common blues, couldn't resist something a little bit more esoteric to finish on. This is a Camperwell Beauty. Beautiful, large, showy butterfly, named because it was first seen around, I think, 1750s in Camperwell, which was then a rural area. And indeed, there may be beauties in Camperwell still, but they won't look like this anymore. A very secretive butterfly. It's very nervous, very difficult to approach. But there have been the very odd sightings of Camperwell Beauty. I think even 1 or 2 in our region recently. Not that I think that means it's soon to arrive. This is Queen of Spain for Trillery, absolutely beautiful for Trillery, which for many years I have to say was my favourite butterfly. But then I heard an interview with a famous naturalist who was asked, "What's your favourite butterfly?" And he thought for a moment and he said, whichever one I'm looking at the moment. And I think that's my That's my view now, whichever one I'm looking at the moment. But it's got this beautiful sort of bronze green suffusion, very beautiful bold markings. It has started to arrive on the south coast of Britain, probably courtesy of global warming. But surprisingly, given that it is extremely migratory for Trillery, that since records began some 250 years ago, there have only been 500 instances of ever reaching Britain. And but whether it's going to be able to get established and breed here remains to be seen. But certainly there's a lot of people that would like to include that in our list of resident or regular migrant species. On the right, we have marsh for Trillery, which you might wonder, what on earth is that doing here? And the reason for that is much the same as for the Adonis blue, in that it's clearly a recent unauthorized release by somebody, and we don't know who, occurring within the county. But it is a beautiful butterfly. There's probably no great reason why it shouldn't become established, but it has been seen in the county this year, may or may not become established, but certainly it wasn't a policy of the county to introduce it, or indeed to approve of its introduction.
Where is it from, please?
Sorry?
What is its range, please?
What, within the county or within the UK?
No, you know, just in Europe.
It's right across Europe. It's a butterfly of the south. We have 3 small fritillaries in Britain: Heath fritillary, Glanville, and Marsh. They're all very highly localized in Britain and rare, but they're all extremely common right across Europe. And marsh fritillary is a very strange butterfly across Europe because it is common. There are forms that have adapted to marshy terrain, hence its name. And its name came from the early English entomologists, from the dry south, hot regions of Provence, and also at high altitude, 2,500 meters and above. And there are actually about 8 or 10 different forms of marsh fritillary in France alone. In Britain, only in the southern counties, Dorset, Devon, and in that region. Is that full enough answer?
Excellent. Yes.
And finally, long-tailed blue. This is the underside of the long-tailed blue with this beautiful mottled underside. It's always a butterfly that when you take a photograph of it, you know if you've got a good photograph, if it looks out of focus. But it's named because it's got these long tails here and these beautiful 2 eye spots at the corner of the hind wing, which are actually, I don't know if you can just see that, are just silver edged. And it's a butterfly that is highly migratory. It's a strange butterfly in that for such a small butterfly, it occurs in exactly the same form in huge parts of the world, in North America and Asia. Whereas most of the species have evolved into different species, it's actually the long-tailed blue, the Latin name is Lampedis boeticus, and it's exactly the same species occurred in North America. But it has occurred, courtesy of global warming, on the south coast of Britain and has actually bred. Whether it can overwinter or whether it just becomes a regular migrant remains to be seen. Anyway, that's the last of my slides. So I'm happy to take any questions. If Malcolm's still there.
I am. I'm here.
I think Malcolm's muted.
Yeah, we're all muted. He's probably gone to sleep. Sorry. Where is he?
I have that effect on people.
No.
Hold on, I'm trying to get my picture back. Hold on.
Yeah, sorry, I had to, I muted everyone because there was quite a bit of background noise coming through during Roger's talk. But yeah, thanks, Roger. That was fantastic. It's really interesting to hear all about that. I think I haven't got any questions in the chat room, but if anyone if anyone has got a question, then perhaps if you can unmute yourself and ask it now, that would be great. Oh.
Where can you see the Queen of Spain for Trillery around here?
Well, it won't be around here. It's
No, but Chilterns?
no, it's arrived on the south coast.
South Coast.
But I wouldn't actually use the phrase, where can you see Queen of Spain for Trillery?
You
Because
can't.
you need to be very lucky. There have been sightings on the south coast, Kent and Sussex coast, where it's arrived and obviously just decided to settle. But there hasn't, I don't believe there's been any evidence that it's actually sort of permeated further into the country other than just staying on that south coast region.
It's a lovely butterfly, yeah.
Well, the underside is probably even more spectacular. It has these beautiful, very extensive silver mirrors, which cover most of the hind wing in silver. It's a very unusual butterfly.
Yes, I think there were a few seen on the Suffolk coast a few years ago, and I've seen it in the Channel Islands before now. But it's one of those ones which potentially could become a breeding species in this country, but doesn't quite seem to have done so, not on a permanent basis yet, anyway.
And it is highly migratory, so it's surprising that it hasn't reached Britain, and it's not rare in France. It's common right across France, even northern France. So there's no reason why it shouldn't travel across the Channel.
There's a question in the chat box, Roger, which says, really good presentation. This is from Kevin Russ. Is there a good book you'd recommend for a newbie like myself, please?
What, just for British species or for European?
I'm guessing for British. Kevin, do you want to unmute and clarify that?
Yeah, British ideally, well, initially anyway, please, yeah.
Good question. There's a range of books. In fact, there's so many, it's difficult to know which one to recommend. What I would suggest is have a look on the UK Butterflies website, which, as I say, if you just Google UK Butterflies, there's almost, and I'm not saying this against butterfly conservation, but there's a huge amount of information there, including books and book reviews and recommendations, because there are a number of books that have come out recently. I know David Newland, who was one of our members and has certainly been to our AGMs and members days, has produced a book on British butterflies. But there are some you should avoid because they contain some misidentifications. So I would have a look at the recommendation on the UK Butterflies website. If you want a book for Europe, the book I would recommend is the sort of the Bible of European species, is the Tolman and Lewington. That's probably back to front for European species, published by Collins.
Collins, okay. Thank you for that.
Can I just also suggest the field study laminated field guide for just simple identification help, especially if you're just going out in the field. It's just a laminated sheet with all the butterflies on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, but thanks for that. Good talk. Thank you.
Thanks. I've got a question coming from Maggie Cartmel, which I can read out. It says, my garden's designed for insects. Are there any specific plants I should definitely include?
Well, this is a case where people will know more than me, but nectar-rich species, Buddleia, Michaelmas daisy, ice plants, anything nectar-rich would be good for attracting butterflies. It's also usually recommended that you leave a corner, particularly a shady corner of the garden, where the nettles can grow, because that's the food plant of tortoiseshells, peacocks, and red admirals. I have to say, in my garden, that nettle patch is quite extensive, almost from the back door to the fence, but that's another matter.
Oh, you can't tell people to plant nettles in their garden, Roger. They'll never do that.
Oh,
You don't need to plant them in my garden, they just arrive.
Don't plant them in the garden, put them in a big pot. A
Nick
half-barrel
Bowles has
pot, that
posted
way
a
to
comment
drain.
about in response to the previous question, saying that the I Record Butterflies app has got a very good butterfly identification guide on it. I'd agree with that, as it's something I've been using quite a bit. But it's a free app which you can download, and is a very simple way to reporting your butterfly sightings.
so may I chime in? May
Go
I
ahead.
chime in? Hi. First of all, I want to tell Kevin that his book is on the way.
I think Kevin's already received it,
I've
actually.
emailed, thank you. And I've received.
And then I want to say that this is my favorite book on British butterflies by J.A. Thomas, and it has it's a skinny little book. It fits in your pocket, and it has habitat pictures, which I love, and then it has fantastic stuff on. Anyway, there you go. But what I was most interested in was the behavior of the Camperwell Beauty, because it's very easily approachable butterfly in the United States, where we call it the morning cloak.
Yeah.
Not skittish at all, and comes out of hibernation, or it's migratory, but it also year round, and very easily approachable. But obviously it has different behavior in Britain.
Yeah, you have a much more sensible name for it, morning cloak. That's morning with a U in it.
Yes, right.
not the time of day. Yeah, that is true. Let me clarify.
Can you hear me, Malcolm? I've had a message.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think Roger's just speaking.
I'll concede to Liz.
No, my internet's very unstable at the moment, but there is a bit of 20.
Okay, shall I go until Liz comes back?
Yeah, why don't you keep going, Roger?
It's £2
for Brian's book.
No, don't do that.
Okay, I'll try again.
Keep going.
Let me clarify with Camperwell Beauty. Is that it overwinters as an adult. And I have to say, where I am in southern France, again, wearing a hair shirt, I see quite a lot that emerge from hibernation around April time, and they really are quite approachable, because they're not going anywhere anytime soon. They're usually showing signs of wear. But when I say they're unapproachable, it's the summer brood, when they come down to the ground and they're puddling or taking salts. The males are taking salts from the ground. Like many of the species that are taking salts, they're very aware that they're prone to attack from predators there, and they're very skittish. Yeah, and I have to say, if you need to see it before it sees you. But if you scare it, it's back up in the canopy within about 2 seconds. So there's two elements.
Cool. Okay, Sue Taylor has recommended marjoram as an excellent plant for butterflies. Yes. And I'd certainly agree that. I get loads of gatekeepers on mine here, and as well as mint moth. And also to make a small bit of meadow too, which again is a bit of long grass, is a very good way for getting some meadow browns and gatekeepers into your garden. And Lynn's saying, I planted nettles in my bear garden when I moved there. The gardener, where I volunteer, couldn't get over it. Nettles certainly are. I find nettles in gardens can be a bit disappointing, because people tend to put them out of the way in shady corners, and the butterflies that lay on nettles do tend to prefer sunny positions. So if you are tempted to put nettles in your garden, it's really having a big patch in the middle in the sunny position is the best one. But it's probably best to get your neighbour to do it in their garden, I think, or somewhere nearby. Then you can enjoy the butterflies but don't have the nettles. Then Martin Taylor's recommending a book, which is the Wildlife Trust's Pocket Guide, published by New Holland, which is a good one for beginners. And we've got one for Chris Newman say, is your information available anywhere, or will I need to go back to the recording of your talk? Well, I guess, Roger, that's a question for you. It will be available on the link from the front homepage of the branch website as of later this week.
No, I had some sort of notes to make sure that I didn't forget sort of key points, but nothing that I could sort of circulate. So it would be coming down to the recording, I'm afraid.
Okay. Are there any more questions before? I've got one or two other things I just want to do before we finish, but yes, Brian.
Yeah. Malcolm, bear with me. That's right. So Essex Skipper is very interesting because it occurs in North America, where we call it the European skipper. And 30 years ago, you could routinely find in the meadow 10,000 Essex skippers flying around together. If you wanted to find the chrysalis or caterpillars, you could do it by the hundreds, and they're almost all gone now. And so, have you heard about that? And I don't really know what the reason is. They came and they proliferated for 20 years, and now they're you're lucky to see 10
I think
in it.
it's the same here in Europe. Certainly on the continent. I mean, the image I showed of 500 golden skippers, small and Essex skippers,
Right.
That was 10 years ago. And I've been back to the same place every year, nowhere near those numbers. So I think it's happening everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my perception in Hertfordshire is that they're declining at present, but probably, over a 50-year period, they probably increased quite a lot and are now declining. But they're actually, they're probably present in more areas in Hertfordshire and going further west across the country than they have been historically.
Would it be the parasitic wasps attacking them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be all. Everything attacks butterflies, wasps, birds, spiders. I think every butterfly, probably a female one, probably lays many hundred eggs. So by definition, 99.9% of them don't make it. Otherwise, we'd be knee deep in butterflies by now, which sadly we're not. But, as those of you that have, oh, hang on, I just got a couple more in the chat. One saying thank you for a lovely talk, and Neil saying the Butterfly Conservation website has a list of plants, and if you sign up to the All the Flutter e-newsletter, which I was mentioning earlier, then there's regular garden tips in there. So if you want to sign up to get the regular monthly email newsletter from Butterfly Conservation, then you can do it. It's all free, and you just have to go onto the main Butterfly Conservation website to do that. I was just going to quickly to run a poll before we went. This is just to help us understand how people have heard about the talk tonight. So if you should see something up on the screen shortly, and there's just today there's actually 3 questions rather than 2. So I'll launch that now, and if you wouldn't mind just responding to that would be great. It's really neat. I can see how everyone's voting in real time. The little bars going across the screen.
Like, who wants to be a millionaire, isn't it? Please vote now.
No, it's not, because there's no prize at the end, Roger. No, you probably deserve one for doing such a great talk. Well, I can now see that 93% of you have voted, so I'm going to bring it to an end, and I can, oh, just escape there. And share the results, which is very, very consistent with the other one, that about 2/3 of you have heard about it from the email we sent out, and the rest from various other sources. Three-quarters of your branch members. Oh, a 90% approval rating, Roger. That's excellent. Lots of people enjoyed it, and that's very much reflected in the comments coming in the polls as well. Nick Bowles has posted, say, anyone who's got an interest in moths might like to read the new State of the UK Moths publication, which again has been launched today, and there's links to that on the BC National website as well as in the All Aflutter newsletter, if you're interested. Great. Okay. Well, thanks very much for that. Liz, are you on at present?
I am back. I lost a bit.
You were saying you thought you had a bid for the book.
I have a private bid. Somebody sent me a bid directly
Excellent.
to me for £20.
Well, I haven't got any other bids, so I guess on that basis it's the winner. If you could ask the person to,
I've asked them to contact you because
send me an
I've lost
email.
all the messages. I've lost all the chat after that came through, so I'm hoping I've got the right name.
Great. Okay.
I want to thank Brian for the children's book that he gave me, sent me 6 weeks ago, which is now with my 20-month-old granddaughter.
Yay! Wonderful, wonderful.
I thought you'd like to know that.
Yeah,
Brian, very, very happy about that.
Okay. Well, I think I think we got up to a maximum total of 64 people at one point this evening, and I think that's the record so far. So it's great that we've done that. I particularly want to say thank you to Hilary. I've been admiring you sitting out in your garden with your buddleias while we've been watching the rest of the talk. That looks like you're living somewhere that's got much better climate than the rest of us.
Actually, it's my garden last summer.
Oh well, I bet you can't wait till it's summer again.
Background.
Yes, it's lovely. Great. Okay. Oh, I've got a few more things in the chat. I'll just check if there's any other questions. There's lots of people saying thank you to Roger.
Thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, that was really great. Thanks a lot, Roger. Really appreciate it. And just to mention again, that our next talk will be in 2 weeks' time when Andrew Wood will be talking about the records of butterflies in our area from 2020 and moths as well. So hope to see you all then. Cheerio.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.